Good day to everyone. We are the Group 2 and we will be presenting Lesson 6 of General Education 1, Understanding the Self. The first topic to be discussed is global versus differentiate model. First off, a global model outline the body or self as a whole and cannot be broken down into parts. Meanwhile, differentiate models are the opposite of a global model and identifies the body or self as a cluster of parts to make a whole. With that said, the first model is the global model known as Gestalt psychology. Gestalt theories emphasize that the whole of anything is greater than its part. That is, the attributes of the whole are not deducible from analysis of the parts in isolation. We tend to perceive object as complete rather than focusing on the gap that the object might contain. The second model is also a global model, referred to as a phenomenological humanistic psychology. Phenomenological humanistic psychology is a perspective that emphasizes looking at the whole person and the uniqueness of each individual. It emphasizes that the person is a total person and cannot be reduced into parts.
The third model is a differentiated model called psychoanalysis. It states that the psyche is divided into the id, ego, and superego. The id is the primitive and instinctive component of personality. It is the impulsive and unconscious part of our psyche, which responds directly and immediately to basic urges, needs, and desires. Meanwhile, the ego is that part of the id which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. The ego develops to mediate between the unrealistic id and the external real world. It is the decision-making component of personality. Ideally, the ego works by reason, whereas the id is chaotic and unreasonable. Lastly, the superego incorporates the values and morals of society, which are learned from one's parents and others. The superego's function is to control the id's impulses, especially those which society forbids, such as sex and aggression. It also has the function of persuading the ego to turn to moralistic goals rather than simply realistic ones and to strive for perfection. The fourth model is also a differentiated model, known as self as personality divided into traits. This model covers the big five factors or the big five personality traits. The five broad personality traits described by the theory are extroversion, also often spelled extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. The fifth and last model is a differentiated model, referred to as the self as divided into dimensions: the physical biological dimension, emotional dimension, behavioral dimension, social dimension, moral dimension, and spiritual dimension. That would be all for the global versus differentiated models. We will now proceed to the next topic, real versus ideal self-concept, which will be presented by the next reporters. To gain preliminary knowledge, the next topic will cover concepts developed by Karen Horney and Carl Rogers. Under Horney, the reporters will discuss in depth the concept of idealized self and real self. On the other hand, under Rogers, the main concepts to be discussed are the person-centered theory and the self-actualizing theory. Without further ado, let us proceed to the discussion.
Who are you? What makes you you? Your answer can show how you see yourself. If your response is primarily positive, then you tend to feel good about who you are and you see the world as a safe and positive place. If your response is mainly negative, then you may feel unhappy with who you are. Self-concept is the image that we have of ourselves. This image develops in a number of ways, but is particularly influenced by our interactions with important people in our lives. Current Horney's psychoanalytic social theory is derived or inspired from the founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Now, she expanded it and called it social theory or psychoanalytic social theory. This theory was built due to Horney's assumption that cultural and social conditions, especially the childhood experiences, play a colossal role in one's character or personality. Horney believed that human beings, if given an environment of discipline and warmth, will develop feelings of security and self-confidence and a tendency to move toward self-realization, feeling alienated from themselves. People need desperately to acquire a stable sense of identity. This dilemma can be solved only by creating an idealized self-image, an extravagantly positive view of themselves that exists only in their personal belief system. As the idealized self-image becomes solidified, neurotics begin to believe in the reality of that image. Horney recognized three aspects of the idealized image: the neurotic search for glory, neurotic claims, and neurotic pride. These three aspects will be discussed in depth with the next reporter during Horney's self-image in the neurotic. According to Karen Horney, if it is contrary to who you really are, it will create incongruence. Congruence means not being compatible with who you really is, what talent you have, what capabilities or capacities you possess. Your idealized self-image and your real self doesn't match, and it often leads a person to hate their self.
The previous reporter tackled about the short background of Horney and her psychoanalytic theory. Now, hear me out as I'll discuss self-image in the neurotic by Horney. Self-image in the neurotic by Horney. Have you ever known someone who seemed to have a pathological need to be liked by others? According to theorist Karen Horney, this behavior is due to a neurotic need for affection and approval. Horney believed that human beings, if given an environment of discipline and warmth, will develop feelings of security and self-confidence, and there will be a tendency for him to move toward self-realization. But if the person feels that he is being alienated from themselves, people need desperately to acquire a stable sense of identity. This dilemma can be solved only by creating an idealized self-image. Neurotic people imagine themselves as perfect, wonderful, and glorious. It is divided into two self, which is despised self and ideal self. Despised self is assuming that a person is hated by everyone around them. A person is having a conclusion that he is hated by everyone around him due to his insecurities. For example, Joy is thinking that everyone doesn't like her because of her body size. Ideal self is a version of ourselves created out of our experiences, demand of the society, and admiration in some personalities. For example, your parents are medical doctors who are respected and admired in the community. And experience tells you that in order to be happy, you need to be smart and have a high-paying job. But if your ideal self is far from your real self, you'll be stressed and you'll be consider yourself as a failure. The idealized self-image is expressed as neurotic search for glory, neurotic claims, and neurotic pride. As neurotics come to believe in the reality of their idealized self, they begin to incorporate it into all aspects of their lives, their goals, their self-concept, and their relations with others. Horney referred to this comprehensive drive toward actualizing the ideal self as a neurotic search for glory. Example, I must win at the class mayor position, so I'll be everyone's leader. A second aspect of the idealized image is neurotic claims. In their search for glory, neurotics build a fantasy world, a world that is out of sync with the real world, believing that something is wrong with the outside world. They proclaim that they are special and therefore entitled to be treated in accordance with their idealized view of themselves. Because these demands are very much in accord with their idealized self-image, they fail to see that their claims of special privilege are unreasonable. Example, the drivers who received a ticket due to double parking. They will claim that others get by, and that is unfair. That's why they should also get by. The third aspect of an idealized image is neurotic pride, a false pride based not on a realistic view of the truth, self, but a spurious image of the idealized self. Neurotic pride is qualitatively different from healthy pride or realistic self-esteem. Genuine self-esteem is based on realistic attributes and accomplishments and is generally expressed with quiet dignity. Neurotic pride, on the other hand, is based on an idealized image of self and is usually loudly proclaimed in order to protect and support a glorified view of oneself. Example, blaming your friend for not passing the tests. The feeling of being separated from yourself creates an overly positive view of yourself. Because of your aspirations that is too far from real self, it creates undesirable effects like stress, depression, and anxiety. Self-hatred is expressed as self-contempt or alienation from self. Relentless demands on self by erecting a complex set of shoulds. Horney referred to this as tyranny of the should, and according to her, people with a neurotic search for glory can never be happy with themselves, because when they realize that their real self does not match the insatiable demands of their idealized self, they will begin to hate and despise themselves. For example 1, I should graduate as valedictorian. Another example, I should graduate with a general weighted average of flat 1. That would be all for Horney's idealized self and self-image in the neurotic. We will now proceed to Roger's person-centered theory and self-actualizing tendency, which will be discussed by the next reporters.
Person-centered theory places great emphasis on the individual's activity to move in positive directions. Practitioners of the theory have a belief in the trustworthiness of individuals and in their innate ability to move toward self-actualization and health when the proper conditions are in place. And also, centered theory became one of the most popular theories of counseling and therapy since it developed in the 1940s. Self-actualizing tendency. Carr describes self-actualization, the continuous lifelong process whereby an individual's self-concept is maintained and enhanced by a reflection and the reinterpretation of various experiences, which enables the individual to recover, change, and develop. Carl Roger believed that for a person to achieve actualization, they must 1. In a state of congruence. This means that self-actualization occurs when a person's ideal self.
With this, there are three Rogers requirements for actualization: the genuineness, unconditional acceptance, and empathy. First is genuineness, also known as congruence, is the most important concept in theoretic counseling according to Rogers. When therapist is genuinely, she must share their emotional reactions to a client's problem and experience. In addition, it refers to the things such as emotions that are real and not pretended. Second, unconditionally acceptance. According to Rogers, it involves showing complete support and acceptance of a person no matter what the person says or does. In addition, it is a process of accepting without any expectations and continues to offer love unconditionally. And lastly is empathy, used to describe a wide range of experience and ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to recognize and understand others' feelings. In addition, it defines us to understand and share in the thoughts, feelings, or emotions of someone else.
Self-concept. Number 1 is congruent. There is a considerable overlap between real self and ideal self. There is a close match or harmony between the two. And number 2 is incongruent. There is a little overlapping between real self and ideal self. There is mismatch which lead to anxiety. The person will become defensive, is use distortion and denial to reduce incongruence. This means congruent are described as states in which a person's ideal self and person's actual experience are consistent or very similar, while incongruent are opposed to congruent. It has state of not being suitable or compatible with his real feelings and experience because the truth hurts.
Thank you for listening to our group's presentation on Lesson 6 of General Education 1, Understanding the Self. Any queries regarding the topics will be answered by the end of the class discussion. Once again, thank you and good day.